Hi guys, Ray from Whimsical Pictures here, and today we're going to be talking about some of the extremely talented and oft overlooked women creating amazing shonen and seinen manga. Shonen and seinen, of course, are marketing demographics in Japanese books and magazines that are male targeted. So shonen means boys and covers a demographic roughly 8 to 18, whereas seinen means young men and covers like the 18 to 34 demographic. And naturally, these two demographics have long been considered sort of a boys' club in terms of both readership and authorship. But in reality, women have been creating amazing shonen and seinen manga since the 60s and 70s. So me and two other manga YouTubers, G from SimplyGee and Laura from the Manga Hoarder, got together and decided we'd like to recommend to you some incredibly talented shonen and seinen mangaka who happen to be women. So we have each created our own separate list, and of course I will link their lists in the description below. We made sure there was no overlap, so if you watch all three videos together, you'll walk away with 15 different authors to check out, and may even discover that some of your favorite series were penned by women and you had no idea, which certainly happened to me when we were discussing the video. So without further ado, my number 5 female shonen mangaka is Yumi Hotta, the writer of Hikari No Goal, which is one of my favorite sports series. Of course, the art is done by Takeshi Obata, who went on to do Death Note and Bakuman and a bunch of other things. But he hardly needs any more spotlight than he already gets. What I really love about this series ultimately isn't the art. It's the passion that Hotta clearly has for the sport and that the characters have for the sport. You know, these fast-paced, complicated matches that we get, where I don't necessarily walk away knowing more about how to play Go than I did walking into it, but I certainly walk away breathless, really understanding why Hotta is so captivated by this game, and why these characters are so captivated by it. And ultimately it comes down to the strength of the character writing. I really love this sort of high tension rivalry between the main character Hikaru and this young prodigy, Akira Toya, who he really wants to defeat. And I really love the slow growth of the relationship between Hikaru and the ghost of Fujiwara no Sai, a amazing Go player from the Heian era that is possessing him and is what gets him into Go in the first place. You know, and sort of Hikaru coming to love Go in itself rather than just, you know, doing what Sai wants him to do. And that relationship ultimately culminates in one of the most emotional moments I think I've ever encountered in manga, even to this day, about halfway through the series. And this is just a fantastic sports manga about an interesting subject that the author clearly has a ton of passion for, so I highly recommend her. Number 4 from me is going to be an author who's been getting a lot of buzz lately, who is really young, actually, and that is Yoshitoki Oima, who created A Silent Voice. And this is the story of Shoko, a girl who is deaf, and Shoya, who is a bully. And he torments her throughout elementary school until it gets to be too much and she transfers out, and then the classroom turns on him and the bully becomes the bullied. And when they meet in his last year of high school, it's after he's spent several years teaching himself sign language so he can apologize to her before ending his life. And he goes to do that, and she is so thrilled to meet someone who can actually talk to her, which even her mother hasn't bothered to learn sign language, that they sort of strike up an unlikely friendship, even though obviously she doesn't necessarily want anything to do with him. And it's all about sort of whether he has the possibility for redemption from this awful thing that he's done, and whether she can move past this horrible blow to her self-esteem that comes from this horrible, horrible bullying that she's had to deal with. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, but this should be taught in schools. It is an incredibly important work, and I think that's reflected in the story of the series Genesis, which is basically, it started as a one-shot, as most series do. Oima actually created the one-shot when she was 17 years old, so she is incredibly young. But she couldn't find a magazine to publish it because of the controversial and socio-critical content and themes. And she actually ended up embroiled in this long, awful lawsuit because of how controversial the work was. But ultimately, she was able to get it published by Basatsu Shonen magazine, which is actually the magazine that runs Attack on Titan, among a bunch of other things. And it was turned into a series. And I think that that story really shows that she's an author that's not afraid to tackle controversial themes in Japanese culture, which doesn't necessarily typically put that kind of content into its fiction. It's just stuff like disability and bullying, ijime, is just not talked about very much. But this deals with it very frankly and very sensitively. And what I really like is that it deals with bullying as an institutional and culturally reinforced system, rather than just, a boy who's mean because he's insecure, which is how we often see bullying portrayed in fiction, but that's not what bullying is. Bullying is part of our culture, and it has to be burned out from the roots. And this really shows that. But it also shows, the possibility for redemption and for kindness and empathy. And I just really appreciate this. The art is great too. It has a lot of detail that adds an extra layer of realism to a series that is already heartbreakingly realistic. It's only 7 volumes, and I highly recommend it. Oima's new series, a fantasy series called To Your Eternity, has been licensed by Kodansha. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, they put the first few chapters up digitally. And hopefully we'll get a print release for that, but I'm not sure. They haven't really announced anything about it, so definitely a creator to watch. Number 3 for me is going to be the creator of my shonen adventure drug of choice, which is Moggy, and this is created by Shinobu Otaka. And she has a previous series released over here called Sumomomo Momomo, but I have not read that, so my opinion of her is based off of her long-running shonen series, Maki. And what I really love about Maki, this is an adventure story, loosely based off the Arabian Nights, about a boy named Aladdin who has mysterious origins and wants to conquer a dungeon, which is a sort of an environment that is owned by a djinn, and if you conquer it, then you get to take the djinn who possesses a magic weapon called a metal vessel, or a king's vessel. It's like a pun. The only people who can go into the dungeons are people who have been specifically chosen by a Moggy as king's candidates. And as it turns out, Aladdin is one of these fabled Moggy, and he chooses a boy named Alibaba in order to go and conquer this dungeon. And that's really just the first couple volumes, but the whole thing just spans such a huge, fascinating world full of different cultures and countries and environments, and it explores all of this with such a wide-eyed sense of adventure. I love that Otaka really understands her young audience. I always am just charmed to pieces by Shonen Sunday series, and this really exemplifies what I love about those series, which is that sense of adventure and that childlike optimism. But I also love how it tackles complicated themes like discrimination and slavery in a surprisingly nuanced way, much more nuanced than you would usually expect from a series like this, which is, slavery is bad. If we save all the slaves, if we free them all, then they'll all be happy for the rest of their lives. When it's much more complicated than that. And we meet a slave girl named Morgiana who is so cool and, kicks giant tigers to death with her bare feet because she's amazing. But she also, has been freed from slavery by Alibaba, and she's still dealing with sort of the psychological damage that has done to her, while also being an amazing badass. And it's nuanced, but it's simple enough for the children who read the series to understand, and I really appreciate that. This is just a really solid shonen series. Number 2 for me is going to be my obligatory Year 24 entry, because I am me. But this is Keiko Takemiya, who is a member of the Year 24 group of shoujo mangaka in the 70s, who really revolutionized, I would argue, manga as a whole, not just shoujo manga. And like many members of Year 24, she did dabble in shonen manga, and Tutera, which has been released in English, is one of those series. This is one of the great sci-fi manga. It's 3 omnibus volumes long, and I actually think that the description on the back is super good, so I'm going to read that. The future. Having driven Terra to the brink of environmental collapse, humanity decides to reform itself by ushering in the age of superior domination. A system of social control in which children are no longer the offspring of parents, but the progeny of a universal computer. The new social order, however, results in an unexpected byproduct. The Mu, a mutant race with extrasensory powers who are forced into exile by the system. The saga begins on educational planet Ataraxia, where Jomi Marcus Sheen, a brash and unpredictable teenager, is nervously preparing to enter adult society. When his maturity check goes wrong, the Mu intervene in the great hope that Jomi, who possesses Mu telepathy and human physical strength, can lead them back home, to Terra. And this is just such an epic story that covers decades and entire galaxies, and it just feels so big and epic, but it's also just so confidently written. It is perfectly paced from beginning to end, with a surprisingly bittersweet ending that isn't something you would generally expect from shonen manga in the 70s, but it works really well. And it's just so fun to read. There's, telepathy and this great epic battle between the Mu and the humans, and mind control, and a cast of really fascinating, flawed characters, who we get to see throughout the entire span of their lives. And something else that I really love about this is that Takemiya brings her innovative panel layouts that Year 24 were really known for often forgoing the panel grid completely in order to show layers of thoughts and emotions. And Takemiya brings that into shonen manga in a really interesting way that I wish more shonen mangaka would take note of. And in particular, I think it works really well for this series because it's such an interesting way to portray telepathy. As you can see here, he's receiving the memories of another telepathic character. And there's another thing that she does. I don't know if I'll be able to find it. But rather than showing a sequence of panels to convey an action, she'll just show every movement within the action in a single panel. Yeah, like this. So you can see him falling and then landing on his feet in the span of a single panel, which is a very dynamic way of portraying things, and I like that she brings it into shonen manga. So Tutera and Keiko Takemiya are definitely important staples of shonen manga, and I highly recommend them. Finally, my number one pick is my only seinen mangaka on this list, and that is Yuki Urushibata, the creator of Mushi Shi, which ran in the seinen magazine Afternoon. This is 10 volumes long. It's about this guy, Ginkgo, who is a Mushi Shi, and he goes around to different villages curing Mushi-related ailments. And Mushi are supernatural creatures described as the most fundamental forms of life, who come directly from the river of life, which is like this primordial stew of the most fundamental elements of nature and of life. And they don't really seek to harm people. They're just surviving the only way they know how. And as such, they act as an analog both for Japanese folkloric elements like yokai, but also for nature itself. And we get this really nuanced exploration of man's relationship with nature and with each other through them. And reading this series, it's like listening to a ghost story on a rainy summer night, or falling asleep by the campfire as those first few wisps of dreams start to come into your mind. It's a very dreamlike story with a very dreamlike rhythm, and there's really nothing else like it. The art is gorgeous and evocative. I love the archetypal character designs that lend a certain universality to the stories, and I love how beautiful the nature is. You really get the feeling that Urushibata is the type of person who, if she wasn't a mangaka, would be perfectly happy spending hours in her backyard drawing individual blades of grass. She loves nature, and you come to love it too through her. This is a masterpiece, and one of my favorite manga of all time. Yuki Urushibata is incredibly talented. None of her other series have been released in English, unfortunately, but maybe someday we'll get some more Urushibata in our lives. So those are going to be the 5 female mangaka of shonen and seinen manga that I'm going to recommend to you today. Please be sure to check out G and Laura's videos to get some more recommendations, and I'll see you next time, guys. Happy reading!